Okay, so I think we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of myself, Katie, my co-facilitator, the faculty of SBS, we are pleased to welcome you to the first seminar of the spring semester. We are quite excited to have with us today Dr. Venise Berry. She has a exciting presentation to share. I'll just give a brief introduction how we met. I was searching the internet one day for some scholarship looking at HIV prevention materials, and I saw a really wonderful paper that she's published looking at edutainment as one method to provide HIV intervention for young African American girls. And so we hopped on a call, we started talking, and then I realized, like, wow, she's actually very prolific, published several books, which you have read. It's just doing some incredible stuff at the university. And I was really intrigued too about her most recent work, racism in the media. And I think it's quite different from what we have seen so far from presenters and other different talks on racism in the media. So I'm quite excited, and I would say that this particular presentation is usually offered as a workshop, and so she was gracious enough to turn this sort of format into a presentation, and we are just really excited to welcome her today, and we look forward to a discussion at the end. Please come forward with your questions and join us today to welcome Dr. Berry.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I am excited as well about this book. This book is like 20 years in the making. Um, I saw a number of years ago that we often yell racism, and when I look at the problem or the issue, I'm like, is that really racism? And at least as I think about racism. And so I started studying images and messages about African Americans in the media and kind of looking at some of the distinctions that I saw in relation to race, the connection between race and media. So I'm going to share my screen because I have a presentation I want to offer on PowerPoint because I like showing images. And now let me see if I can make it fill the screen. Play from the start. There we go. Oops. Okay, so I'm hoping that, okay. So basically, I want to start off by thinking about two examples. I want to compare and contrast two examples when it comes to racism versus a concept that I have developed called racialism. The first is this LeBron James cover of Vogue magazine. Very controversial. Very, there were a lot of people upset about it. Los Angeles Lakers basketball champion LeBron James is posed exactly like the King Kong poster that you see there. He's got his arms draped around the white model. He's bouncing a basketball instead of holding a club, and his mouth is open wide as if he's growling like King Kong. Well, now this image was, like I said, very problematic, and it promotes several racial ideas, such as, the comparison of Black men to apes, the notion that Black men are obsessed with white women, and the historical myth that Black people coming out of Africa are like apes or animalistic or violent natures, savage, that kind of thing. So the question is this racist? Is Annie Leibovitz, the person who created this cover, racist? Why would LeBron James agree to pose like King Kong? Is he okay with racism? Why would Vogue magazine use this image on their cover? Are they comfortable perpetuating racism? Now I want to compare and contrast that, and those are the questions. I want to compare and contrast that image with this image from the most popular Black Panther movie. This movie came out in 2018. It was a blockbuster, and basically it featured, this is an image of M'Baku. He is the head of the Jabari tribe of Wakanda, and he is called Man Ape. And his tribe is called the White Gorilla Cult. They use loud, repeated grunts of the gorilla during conflict. And in the movie, they display an aggressive and animalistic image. So the interesting thing about this image, though, is that there was no controversy. There was no outcry of racism. And it's also interesting because the original comic book was written by a white man, but the movie was adapted by a Black director and a Black writer, Ryan Coogler and John Robert Cole. So the question then becomes, are Coogler and Cole racist? And why would actor Winston Duke play a character where the Black man is called a man ape? Is he okay promoting racism? So I started, I've been just exploring some of these ideas concerning racialism and racism. I want to give you some examples. One of the things that I've done is I've come up with this concept called racialism. And what it does is it separates out four elements under this umbrella. The concept is racialism, and I've separated out four concepts. One is stereotypes, two, biased frames, three, historical myths, and four, traditional racism. Okay, so let me give you some examples of what I'm looking at for each one. And I do want to explain too, of course, there are still racists who practice uglier racism, but the perpetuation of racial stereotypes, bias frames, and historical myths through the media it's become a normalized process, and that's what I'm calling racialism. In the 21st century, I believe we need a more nuanced understanding of race and racial constructions. So again, under the umbrella of racialism, racism still exists, but for me, it involves a more malicious and purposeful intent. And I'm really concerned that when we focus everything on racism, when we focus on those extremes only, we miss some really important elements of racialism that are just as powerful and just as problematic. So let me define racialism before we go into the examples. Racialism involves racial ideas, images, and issues. Images and issues produced, distributed, and consumed repetitively and intertextually. Unfortunately, stereotypes, bias frames, and historical myths about African American culture are normalized in this process, particularly through the media. Ultimately, these media representations shape and form societal ideology and behavior. Okay, so my first example of a stereotype is this Kool-Aid commercial, where you have a young Black couple. The logo is old school flavor. And you have a young Black couple who is drinking Kool-Aid sitting on the stoop. Well, now the interesting thing about this piece, and most people wouldn't even pay any attention, but because I've been doing this for a while, red flags go off all the time. I'm looking at this picture and all of a sudden I say, wait a minute, why is there a basketball in this picture? There's absolutely no reason for there to be a basketball in this picture, except that's a stereotype of Black men and athletics. So you have the Black male, he doesn't even have on tennis shoes. He has on hush puppies or something. He's not on a basketball court, but he has this basketball under his foot. Somebody said, oh, we need to put a basketball under his foot. And they felt like that was acceptable. Now, the question is that racist? Okay, that's my question. Here's an example of biased framing. This is not an ad, but an article from Fox Nation. And basically, when Obama was president, his 50th birthday party was held at the White House. And the headline read, Obama's hip hop barbecue didn't create jobs. Well, that's really an interesting biased way to frame his birthday party. First of all, when you tie it to hip hop, which to a lot of people, particularly probably people who watch Fox Nation, it's not considered a positive. And basically, when you look at the four images, only one of them is a rapper. So you've tied all of these Black men to hip hop. So the only one that's a rapper is Jay-Z, and then you have the comedian Chris Rock, you have President Obama, and then you have Charles Barkley, who's an athlete. So again, the whole notion of framing something in a biased way so that it creates a certain kind of image or message in relation to African American culture. This is an example of historical myth. Beautiful, beautiful image of Naomi Campbell racing a cheetah. And the logo is Wild Things. And this is a series, it's a fashion shoot in a magazine. But I wanted to include this because, of course, the historical myth for African Americans is, you know, Africa is wild, Africa is savage, Africa is animalistic. So again, this fashion shoot is tied into that notion, but at the same time, is it racist? Okay. And finally, of course, traditional racism, we all know what that is, at least what I define it as. KKK, burning cross, nooses, you know, the N-word, all those kinds of things to me are traditional racism. And that can also be found in the media. So I use the lens of critical race theory to examine exemplars of how racialism operates within specific media products. In critical race theory, it's important for scholars to recognize that the root causes of disparity are apparent in various systems, structures, and practices. Delgado and Stefanik argue that it's the structural, systematic influence of racial ideology that often creates oppression, bias, and inequality in society. So racialism operates in the mediated experience not only through images, but also through words, as we've seen. There are specific examples of powerful rhetoric that we heard over the last 4 years, especially in the news: dog whistle politics, name calling, blaming the victim. I've got an example below that I think is interesting, a couple of examples actually. This happened during Hurricane Katrina, and it's one of the most obvious examples you could find. 2 articles in Yahoo News in 2005. The image on the left is the white male and the white female wading through water. And if you look at the storyline, it says they found bread and soda from a local grocery store. And then you have the black male who's also wading through water. And it says that he looted a grocery store. So again, looking at how different words create different messages and images. And in my opinion, of course, this to some extent is racism, because this is the traditional hatred, the traditional malice and purposeful kinds of problems that we see. This is another example, but I don't know if this is racist. Came out from H&M, and I mean, there was a huge controversy, but this hoodie says "coolest monkey in the jungle," and a little African-American boy is modeling it. And of course, when you talk about African-Americans and monkeys and jungles, you're going back to that historical myth of Africa. But this is part of the issue in relation to different images and messages, is how effective commodification has been of Black culture. So again, is it racist? Maybe, maybe it's not. Okay. So
they're going to start, I think, in this month or next month, and we feel that because of COVID.
Is that somebody talking to me? Oh no, maybe they're talking to somebody else. Okay, so I wanted to cover each of my chapters real briefly, just to let you know kind of what kinds of things I'm exploring. Chapter 1 deals with contemporary Zip Coons. It's called Contemporary Zip Coons, the Problem with Funny. And basically it offers a critical examination of the prominence of the Zip Coon stereotype in today's films and TV shows. The Zip Coon stereotype has been modernized, yet the character still acts crazy, dresses flamboyantly, and talks inarticulately. And so I've put a couple of examples here. Meet the Browns, which is from Tyler Perry. And again, the interesting thing about this, and then of course, Chris Tucker from Friday and from the Rush Hour series. And the interesting thing about here is Chris Tucker is created by an African-American man, Tyler Perry. But he is one of the most obvious modern day Zip Coon stereotypes that we've seen in a long time. He basically dresses ridiculously, as you can see in this image. He's portrayed as stupid. He doesn't understand the English language, and his acting is over the top with a lot of whining and hand waving. Chris Tucker is a little bit more unconventional, but in the Friday series, he's a slow-witted, mumbling, lazy coon. And in the Rush Hour series, he gives us the bug-eyed look. He constantly misunderstands and mispronounces words, along with his loud talking and his high-pitched voice. I have a chapter 2, Ghetto Fabulous, How Low Can You Go? And basically I examine bias framing here in that, you know, ghetto has come to equal black and black has come to equal cool. And so there's this focus on problematic representations in reality television, rap music, news, urban fiction novels, at the expense of other, to me, more interesting and relevant African-American stories. So when we think about Ghetto Fabulous, some of the images I have here are Wanda Clark has a series of urban fiction books like Thugs and the Women Who Love Them, Crackhead 1, Crackhead 2. We're all familiar with the Real Housewives of Atlanta. Even though they have an upper class status, they still act in a pretty raunchy ghetto kind of way. And you can't really, I don't think you can see, and I don't know how to, wait a minute, maybe I can get rid of it. There. Okay. And then this is a rapper. I don't even know who he is. I didn't bother to look it up, but I just wanted to use him as an example of how rap music can give us a lot of ghetto images, problematic images, the bling bling and all the different kinds of commodification of wealth, conspicuous consumption and those kinds of issues, fighting, cursing, all those issues. Okay, why is this not, hold on, this is not. Ah, there it is. Okay, so chapter 3 is advertising in Black folks was up. And it covers, of course, advertising African Americans. I use Barth's semiological chain of communication to explore meaning in advertising, specifically when it comes to the inclusion of African American images and messages. There are exemplars below. I want to go through a few exemplars of both positive and problematic frames in advertising. The first one is Life Cereal's Maple and Brown Sugar, which uses an image of a young Black girl and boy, and then Life Cereal Regular, which uses a white mother and a white son. Now, of course, race is used in this example, but it's not racism. So again, just racialism kind of looks at these elements of race in media that are technically not tied to racism, but it also includes traditional racism. These two ads are interesting. This Nivea ad is called Recivilize Yourself. And the interesting thing about it is you have the African-American man with the short cut hair, and he's about to throw away his bushy hair, a head with his bushy hair, and that is his head with his natural hair. And it says, re-civilize yourself. So of course the natural hair is seen as uncivilized. And of course, that ties to the historic myth about Africa as savage, uncivilized, etc. And then on the right side is Gerber Yu Chu. And they do a whole series of pictures. So this is just one. Some of them are don't have the same kind of problems or don't have the same problem this one has. But I wanted to include this because I think this is an important area for us to pay attention to. When you position the white child in front of the Asian and the African child, you're creating kind of a superiority, better than, putting that child ahead of. And so you have to be very careful when certain things are situated in a way that gives messages that are problematic. And again, sometimes you would see it as racism, sometimes you might not. And so I'm not sure that the person who was doing this ad, who positioned it like this, since I look at racism as something that's malicious and purposeful, I'm not sure the person said, oh yeah, let's put the Asian and the Black baby in, behind the white baby. That may not have happened, but it may have unconsciously happened. So, because of course we know that in most of society, the mainstream is considered white and everything else is compared to and connected to that. And then finally, a couple of positive examples of reframing that I wanted to include in advertising. On the left is the mammy image. It's a kind of a re-envisioning of the mammy image. This is a Black woman advertising Pine Sol, which of course the mammy is a maid. That's the stereotype of the Black woman as a maid. She's usually a plus size Black woman. But the normal mammy is not beautiful, but this woman is in a satin gown. Her hair is done, beautifully. She has her makeup and her nails done, just giving her that alternative image to the typical mammy. And on the right side, of course, we know the stereotype of Black men is that they're thugs and criminals and drug dealers, and they don't take care of their kids. So this Tide ad is a really beautiful alternative to those negative stereotypes. Chapter 4 deals with a TV show called Blackish. It's called Blackish and the Changing Nature of Black Identity. And basically, I created discussion around a number of core ideas concerning the authenticity of Blackness, because that's what the movie does. It demonstrates how Black identity and authenticity clash when Black people try to maintain their sense of culture while at the same time progressing in the American mainstream. So here's an image of the family. Dre, they live in the suburbs, and Dre is an advertising executive. Rainbow is a doctor. They have 5 kids. Blackness is changing in the Johnson family, and 3 generations of Black cultural ideas are dissected in this TV show. It's interesting to see how this family transforms on a weekly basis. Above, in this image, the family is waving to a tour bus as the announcer says, this is the perfect Black family thriving out of their natural habitat. Of course, the natural habitat is the ghetto or the inner city. Chapter 5, Balancing Stereotypes. I really wanted to look here less at the stereotypes of Black males and females on television, the characteristics, and more at how those stereotypes are being balanced. So what I did was I looked at 3 female characters from the prominent writer Shonda Rhimes, and then I also looked at 3 positive Black male characters, and these characters are all working in the criminal justice system, but they're providing a balance for the negative stereotypes of Black men as gangsters or criminals or drug dealers. So the images I have here, of course, the top left is Kerry Washington as Olivia Pope in Scandal. She's shown as a powerful Black woman, but she's having an affair with the married American president. On the right top is Chandra Wilson, played by Miranda Bailey. And in the beginning, she was linked to the stereotypes of the angry Black woman and the mammy, but they were soon balanced out with her excellent surgical skills. She's a loving wife and she's a good friend. On the bottom left is, the bottom right is Shamar Moore, and he's the head of a SWAT team in Los Angeles named Hondo. And they actually set it up so that we understand that he joined the force in order to create a better connection between the police and Black neighborhoods. That was his goal in joining the force. And finally, on the bottom left is LL Cool J, who plays Sam Hanna, a former Navy SEAL working for NCIS in Los Angeles. And the interesting thing about Sam and the alternative to the typical stereotype of Black males is he speaks 6 languages, he's a Star Trek fan, he has a fear of clowns, and he creates origami. So they give him some really interesting, unique details to make him an alternative to the stereotype. Chapter 6, a satirical parody, Black Jesus in the Hood. And this is a satire created by Aaron Magruder. It's about Black Jesus living in Compton with his 4 homies, loosely seen as disciples. And the show basically connects religious ideology with the reality of living in poverty in the 21st century. And Black Jesus is very controversial because he sports sandals with socks, he quotes Bible verses, he smokes weed, he curses, and he calls God Pops. So the interesting thing is that the show uses a variety of different negatives in order to show us some of the problems in relation to the connection between religion, or religious ideology, I should say, and the acceptance or the continuance of poverty in Black communities and Black neighborhoods. And as you can see, you know, these images show us things like the police brutality because he gets arrested. He's drinking. He actually in one scene turns some water into wine, and here he's holding beer. And then those are his disciples on the top left. And his disciples include a woman, which is also interesting. And Black Jesus constantly expresses angers about society's transgressions, but he still accepts everyone as the imperfect people they are. Basically, within inner city boundaries, he highlights notions of morality and difference. Chapter 7 is Deconstructing Intersectionality and Crash. It's an evaluation of the movie's complex depiction of racial relations. My analysis suggests that the collision between different cultures and ideology, the dissection of issues of race, gender, class, ethnicity, culture, identity, they all examine various notions of social relations. And the ensemble class, you know, is just outstanding. The twisted storyline in Crash connects through real symbolic and ideological intersections. It disturbs and challenges our normal perceptions of societal institutions, as well as individual and collective racist behaviors. It's a very excellent movie. If you haven't seen it, the director and the writer do a great job of introducing the stereotypes and then turning those stereotypes on their head, which I think is an awesome situation. Chapter 8 is Black Twitter, Interpretive Communities and Cultural Capital. It looks at how Twitter has redefined activism and protesting, especially in the Black community. So what I did here was look at how interpretive communities have been developed through Black Twitter. Things like hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Oscar So White, hashtag Black Girl Magic. These have become prominent ideas and movements. Nationwide, worldwide, actually, in a lot of situations because of Black Twitter. And then these are just some examples. These Black Twitter communities are generating shared experience and meaning by uniting under a collective discourse through social media. So again, showing some areas of race in media that are important, that are relevant, that are significant, but that may not or are not racism. Chapter 9, President Barack Obama, Biased Frames and Microaggressions. This chapter looks at media coverage of Barack Obama during his 2 presidential campaigns and 2 terms as President of the United States of America. And it's really interesting because various visual and verbal media frames connected to the first Black president in America are explained. And I really wanted to look at the connection with issues like white supremacy, inequality, racialism, and racism. So some of the examples I have here are, this is Arizona Governor Jan Brewer, who disrespectfully wagged her finger in President Obama's face, which I never imagined I don't remember seeing that happen to other presidents. And it's similar, in my opinion, to South Carolina Representative Joe Wilson when he screamed out, "You lie," during the president's congressional address. Again, never happened to any other president, only a Black president. Down at the bottom on the left side is a renege bumper sticker, don't renege bumper sticker. This was issued during the 2012 election campaign. And of course we know that NIG is short for the N-word, and it says at the bottom, "Stop repeat offenders, don't reelect Obama." A very interesting look at using traditional racism in a contemporary way, in contemporary time, actually. And then finally on the right side is the New Yorker cover that was so controversial that put President Obama in Muslim garb, and over the fireplace there's a picture of Osama bin Laden hanging, and there's an American flag burning in the fireplace. Michelle is set up as created as a terrorist carrying an AK-47, and they're doing what the Republicans termed a terrorist fist bump. And of course, the New Yorker magazine said this was satire, but unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there who this simply confirmed their belief that President Obama was a closet Muslim, and that they were outsiders. They were the others in our society. And then there were some examples I wanted to include of wording. Um, uh, Again, this comes from Fox News coverage. At one point, the First Lady was called Obama's baby mama. The fist bump between Barack and Michelle during the Democratic primary was labeled a terrorist fist jab. And then pundits insinuated that Obama had a deep-seated hatred for white people and wanted to settle old scores with reparations. So again, wording, really understanding the impact of wording. And finally, chapter 10. In chapter 10, I look at science fiction and fantasy, and the subtitle is Going Where Few Blacks Have Gone Before. And really, I did a critical examination of various themes and characters and narrative techniques in relation to Afrofuturism. These representations in film and television shows and novels and other media offer us images and messages that show the future, particularly as imagined for Black people. So some of the examples I have here is this image on the left. The two images on the left are Star Trek's Lieutenant Uhura. And of course, she was one of the first Black female characters not to be stereotyped as a mammy or a Jezebel. And then there's Halle Berry, who plays Storm in the X-Men. Will Smith, who's at the top right, is the most prominent Black male character in science fiction and fantasy. He has 10 movies under his belt, just science fiction and fantasy movies. And here he poses as Deadshot in Suicide Squad. The robots on the bottom under Halle Berry, Skids and Mudflap, are two robots from the Transformers series. And they became very controversial because they displayed certain rhetorical and behavioral Black stereotypes, like talking in slang and the movements, etc. And then the last picture on the bottom right, Alien versus Predator, it's really interesting. There's always been this joke in the Black community that particularly in sci-fi and fantasy, if there's a Black person in the movie, they're usually the first ones to die. So this is one of the first movies where not only is the Black character the only character left alive, but it's an African-American woman, which is also pretty rare in science fiction pictures. So Sanaa Lathan ends up, I think, breaking a stereotype. So in conclusion, I want to make sure that people understand this is not an effort to let racists and racism off the hook, but rather a means to expose, deconstruct, and critique other factors that make up the connection between race and media. My goal in this book was to provoke serious change when it comes to the problematic racial images and messages that we have all come to know and love. Okay. So I'm going to stop my screen share and take questions and answers. See if I can get it here.
So you've certainly given us a lot to think about. So thank you again, Dr. Berry. I'll open up the question session because I'm quite fascinated by several of the stereotypes and things that you mentioned. So in the public health literature in particular, we discuss a lot of unconscious bias as a way to kind of understand disparities in healthcare use, healthcare utilization when we think about patient-physician relationships. And we've often kind of focused on these unconscious bias within these specific domains. So whether it's in school or healthcare, but you're sort of showing it that it's everywhere in a sense. Like when I think about the commercial you showed with the three babies, I actually didn't really think about the psychological effect of seeing that ordering, right? So we kind of taken it now as a given, as something that is just sort of natural or normal. But again, how is that over time sort of programming our minds to think about the ordering of who deserves care or who deserves treatment? So I kind of want to open it up in terms of the context of health, right? So how do we see, you presented also some unique opportunities where it seems like there's a way to promote health or promote messaging that would lead to good outcomes. So one example is the Procter and Gamble Tide commercial with the black man. Like what do you see as ways that we can expand how we think of unconscious bias towards sort of a larger platform, and then what might be some ways in public health that we can begin to address some of these things in and particularly around the context. Let's say if we want to be much more current around COVID, so thinking about reasons for mistrust and things like that, what might be some strategy that this public health audience can engage with to combat some of these stereotypes that we may not necessarily have been um, primed or familiar with.
You sure Rachel said you got her chapstick in your wallet?
Well, the first thing I think you absolutely have to do is people have to begin to recognize the racialism implications. And that's one of the reasons why I think we have to move away from racism, because the minute you call it racism, people shut down. If you call somebody a racist, they shut down. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to think about it. You know, nobody wants to be a racist. Well, most people don't want to be racist, and most people don't want to practice racism. So we've got to move away from that concept. And I don't think it's hard to move away from that concept, because we've got a lot of things that are going on that are not, in my opinion, and in my description of racism, are not purposeful, and they're not malicious. They're things that, like you said, unconscious bias, normalization. We have to first identify those elements. So we have to make sure that people recognize when they see, you know, the hierarchy of a white child in front of an Asian and a Black child, or a basketball stuck up under the foot of an African American. We have to begin to recognize these as problematic biases, you know, or problematic stereotypes. And then once we do that, we can create images and messages that actually change. You know, once you think about the fact that Black men, you know, the stereotype of Black men as gangsters and criminals, and then you put out an ad like Tide did of a Black man with his sleep with his son on his chest, that says it all. I mean, that's a powerful image that helps to, it's a powerful alternative image that helps to balance out those negatives. So I think that we have to do that in public health. We have to begin to help people understand where the negative ideas and images are, or what the negative ideas and images are, and we have to fix them. We have to twist them. We have to give them alternatives to those images and messages. And, you know, part of it may be as simple as seeing our first African-American Indian vice president, female vice president, take a vaccine shot. You know, I mean, that is an alternative to, you know, Black people who say, oh, you know, Black people shouldn't take this shot. It's probably going to be like the Tuskegee experiment where they're giving us this stuff. And, you know, giving us those kinds of alternatives, or giving groups, various groups, those kinds of alternatives, I think are important. And it's interesting because what I'm doing, I'm focusing on African Americans, but a lot of racialism can deal with other groups as well. You can find examples of historical myth and bias framing and stereotypes concerning Asians and Latinx and, you know, Native Americans. I mean, all of that is significant, I think. And I'm not sure if I completely answered your question, but I tried.
Let's get, I'll open it up to the group. I have some follow-up questions, but I'll open it up to the students and others. So I'll be scanning the room, but feel free to just unmute your mic and jump in.
I always say I was just that good that nobody has any questions because I explained it perfectly, right? Okay.
I see you unmute your mic.
Questions? Comments? You don't have to ask a question, you can make a comment.
I have a question. So I was wondering, thank you first of all for a great presentation. This is just so interesting. But I was kind of wondering if you could talk a little bit about how source matters. So you touched on this at the beginning about if this came from Chris Tucker, is it as racialized or is it as racist than if it came from like a white producer or something like that? Or use the example of Black Panther of like when the author of the comic book created it, is it one thing versus when Ryan Coogler does it, is it another? And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the importance of source and how that should be factored into when people are thinking about ideas of racialism.
Well, you know, part of the argument there is, and this was a brief conversation because I didn't have a whole lot of time, but part of the argument there, of course, is, you know, some people say Black people can't be racist, but I don't know if I agree with that. They say that racism deals with power and prestige, and who has more power than Tyler Perry? So he could be perpetuating racism. If you want to argue, if you want to make that argument. Excuse me. So I think that one of the things that happens is, again, because of racialism, the normalization of certain images and messages and ideas, people don't see it as racism. And if it's a Black person, they don't automatically jump to the racist area. Whereas if it's a white person, they automatically jump to the racist area. And I think that's problematic. And that's one of the things I'm arguing against. As I said, you know, I'm not sure Vogue magazine wanted to promote racism. I mean, I'm not sure they would want to promote racism if they saw that as a racist cover. So then that tells us, what are they seeing? You know, what's being seen if it's not, if they produce that cover and then all of a sudden, boom, find out that, you know, there are these racist components, that people are seeing it as racist. They're seeing something different. They're seeing the norm. They're seeing accepted stereotypes and ideologies and historical myths. And I think that's what we need to think about. So, you know, again, I call racism malicious and purposeful. And so intent is important. And whether you're Black, white, Asian, Latinx, old, young, it doesn't matter. I think intent is important. And calling everything racist, it really doesn't help us solve the problem, because, you know, racism, like I said, or calling somebody, saying somebody is racist or calling it racism pretty much shuts down the conversation. You know, everybody starts arguing at everybody, and you don't have the discussion you need to have about how these images have been, you know, normalized and perfected in our society, to the extent that, you know, Black people buy in too. We love the stereotypes. We watch just as much, you know, we accept Black Panther, we watch as much Medea and Meet the Browns and all that stuff as anybody else.
Thank you. That was a great answer.
I think Maddie had a follow-up. Maddie said, to add to Lexi's questions, what role does reclamation and narrative reframing and racialization in the media?
Okay, repeat that, please.
What role does reclamation and narrative reframing have in racialization in media?
I mean, I think that's part of what I'm arguing, is that we need to reclaim certain ideas and certain images and certain elements. And then, of course, the alternative mammy image shows us how effectively we can make we can make differences in these images and messages. I also feel like, you know, we have a lot of, like, for instance, the television character, the primetime Black and female television characters that I talk about. We basically, you know, you can't really look at them. Like I said, Shonda Rhimes created Miranda Bailey, the doctor, as a angry Black woman and a mammy figure, because she felt like she had to take care of everybody. But the interesting thing is that she basically evolves. She becomes a human being. And I think that's what's important, is the complexity. I teach creative writing courses. I've written several novels that have been published and stuff like that. And one of the things I tell my students all the time is, it's okay to start with the stereotype, because you have to understand what the stereotype is, but then you want to move away from it. You want to start taking your character and having them evolve away from the stereotype, so that people see something different. People see something that's not repetitive and not negative in relation to, you know, a stereotypical image. So I just think that narrative is crucial. in how we explain these images and messages. But like I said, until people begin to understand their unconscious acceptance of various images and messages, and how these images and messages are normalized in certain kinds of ways and how we accept them, I don't think we can make any changes. So that's the first step, is we've got to begin to, whenever I watch television or see a movie and a red flag goes off, I know there's an issue. There's something there I need to pay attention to. And I teach a course called African Americans in Media, and I pride myself on the fact that when my students leave that class, hopefully they all have the same response. When they see something problematic, it goes off in their head and they say, that's a stereotype, or, that's a bias, or that's a historical myth, or that's racism. And then I also tell them to share it. If you're sitting at the movie, you're watching a movie with somebody, say, you know what, that's a stereotype because, or that's racial bias because. So again, just wanting it to move forward so that we can make some changes, so we can transform some of the issues and problems in this society.
Venise, to follow up on that, you kind of talk about the difference between racialization and racism, particularly related to intent. But I'm wondering if there's been any research related to the impact of, is there any difference in the impact of those types of categorizations, or the types of categories that you kind of went over, on the viewers or on the individuals kind of consuming this? So, because even if there is a difference in intent, if the impact is similar, then does it really matter what the intent is? So I think, is there any kind of work looking at that? You see what I'm saying?
I actually have not gone into that at this point. I am doing a current study that I'm looking at Black women in mental health. And what I did was I took 5 examples of African-American women who are in different shows, television shows, who are dealing with mental health issues. And I did an online survey with African-American women to see if watching those images, watching them deal with those mental health issues or talk to that therapist might have some kind of relationship or connection to them. I'm currently working on that data, so I don't have a lot of information yet on that. But I thought it was interesting because so I guess in some way I'm moving in that direction, because Cookie Lyons in Empire goes to see a therapist, and Annalise Keating in How to Get Away with Murder is dealing with alcoholism and the loss of her child in therapy. And I think we also did Bo on Blackish, who deals with, there's an episode where she deals with postpartum depression. I can say, based on the responses I've seen, is that most people really had a stronger relationship with Cookie, because it's a dealing with a man, than postpartum depression or the alcoholism issue, which, like I said, I can't give you any details because I haven't done all the analysis yet, but I'm moving in that direction. I just haven't done any research yet to see what else is out there. I do think, though, that people identify, well, let's put it this way. I think once somebody is woke, that's that new term, right? Everybody's using. I think once somebody understands the distinctions of what's out there, then maybe it won't roll past them the way it's doing now. And I would argue that that's what's happening in a lot of cases. People would see that Kool-Aid commercial and they would think nothing of it. The basketball is normal. The stereotype of the Black man in athletics is normal. So I think that once we get people, I mean, like I said, the first step is just to get people to start seeing that there are these problems. And like I said, I don't know if it's racism. I just really don't know I don't want to call it racism. I should say that. And in my opinion, a lot of it is not racism, it's racialism, because it's these images and messages that are normalized, that we've accepted. And we've got to begin to identify them, and then we can change them.
I have one question that might be related to, so one of the things you mentioned is sort of a term we call internalized racism, right? So you have sort of three levels of racism. The one that typically we all know, which is the prejudice and the actions, the internalized racism that perhaps you mentioned might be what's going on in some of Tyler Perry's films. But I want to raise something is in terms of moving us in direction of how we critique these images. So if we're working with companies, et cetera, or thinking about intervention. And so there's a recent New York Times article that was talking about the vaccine uptake. And I think one person, I forgot what the story was, but someone said, oh, we just need a picture of Beyonce, getting a vaccination. And there's already
And
some,
LeBron James.
yeah, and my first response was like, well, that's not really even going to work. Like Beyonce doesn't represent mainstream Black America, right? And so
Right.
even something as probably well-intentioned in quotation marks, it's still unlikely to resolve or to have an impact in disparities in terms of infection, or even sort of an equitable approach to getting vaccinated, because again, Beyonce it's quite different in terms of socioeconomic status, class, like a whole, there are several ways that one will say that she's not necessarily, she might be an icon in terms of music, etc., but definitely not the type of representation. So can you like maybe share with us in parting what might be some concrete approaches that again we can use in public health as we work with practitioners, or as we work with even health communication teams that are putting out material to try to improve vaccination rates, for example, among COVID. So just sort of what might that look like that we can take away practically as students in public health or as a field?
Well, part of the problem with the question you're asking is what I'm arguing that we need to fix is not going to get fixed overnight. And I think that's the same thing with what you're talking about. Unfortunately, now that we have a vaccine, it's not as easy as saying, okay, this is a good vaccine here, or showing them images of somebody taking the vaccine here, take it. It's going to take some effort. It's going to take a variety of people, a variety of approaches for people who are against the vaccine or people who don't want to take the vaccine to step forward. I think part of it is just, they could put a series of PSAs together, positive PSAs talking about the vaccine, talking about making sure people understand that it is a legitimate vaccine because, of course, because it was created so quickly and because of the rhetoric from the former president, a lot of people have doubt in it, doubt on the vaccine. So if you put that together along with a whole series of ads or PSAs showing people like LeBron, like Beyonce getting shots, talking about the legitimacy of it, showing it in communities where, in Black communities or other minority communities where people are accepting it. Part of it is repetition too. You have to understand that. A lot of times we may not see it the first time, or we may not think about it the first time we see it. But if we see it 2 or 3 or 4 times, it starts to resonate in our brain. And we say, oh, okay, maybe I should think about that. Maybe I should look at that. So again, it's not going to take you can't just walk up to somebody and say, hey, you need to take this vaccine. If it's somebody who doesn't believe in the vaccine or doesn't want to take the vaccine, it's going to take some effort. It's going to take some time. It may take 2 or 3 different people. It may take seeing some PSAs on the TV, and also seeing somebody going by their house talking to them, and also some family members talking to them. It's not an easy change. And what I'm arguing, changing the media and changing these images and messages is not easy because, again, we've all bought in, we've all, accepted them. So it's just going to be it's going to have to be a combination of things, first of all. And second of all, it's going to have to be repetitive. We're going to have to keep on, pushing that message over and over and over again until it finally sinks in. I'm taking it on Wednesday. Matter of fact, tomorrow I go and take my vaccine, and my mother takes hers next week. She's 82. And then my brother says he's not going to take it. So, we all have people in our family who are like, nah, I don't think so. So it's going to take me talking to him, my mother talking to him, me getting it, her getting it. Like I said, if there's some kind of images like Kamala Harris and taking it, and, and maybe somebody like Beyonce or like LeBron James taking it, that combination of things could help to push a person in the direction you want them to go. But again, it's not going to happen overnight. And the changes I would like to see in the media are not going to happen overnight, because this is something that's been going on for many, many years. I mean, we have been developing, we've been perpetuating and promoting stereotypes and bias frames and historical myths for, 50, at least 50, maybe longer now, 100 years. Because when we didn't have television, we still had posters and we still had a lot of different things that they were doing. So anyway.
Thank you for that. So I think we might have time for one last comment. I'll open up one last time, and if not, we would just join again in thanking Dr. Berry for the talk. I believe her information is on the flyer if you guys need to questions. Should be more than happy. I think is there. Okay, that's a clap from Pierre. Okay, just making sure to that. So thank you again.